Going into this, you said earlier that you had already read the Salem Witchcraft papers. Were you at all surprised by any of the records that you found?
Actually, this one that I laughed so hard I fell off the couch. Okay, it comes from one of the words in it that I didn't know, and I looked it up and I fell apart. It's in the case of Elizabeth Howe. And the Cummings family, especially Mare, the wife, really didn't like her. Elizabeth Howe wanted to join the church to become a covenanted member in it, and Mare was just dead set against it. She would invoke something that had happened years before to one of her Pearly relatives. There's a family named Pearly, where somebody accused Elizabeth Howe, and she just never forgot it, even though the accusation went nowhere. Fast forward. I don't know exactly when it was, but Elizabeth Howe's husband went blind. Before he went blind, so let's say 6 or 7 years before Salem, he went to the neighbors, the Cummings house, and said he wanted to borrow a horse. And neither Mary or her husband, Isaac, he was the deacon, and neither of them were home. But Isaac Jr. was there, and here's this neighbor coming and asking, can I borrow a horse? And as teenagers can be, he said, we don't have a horse. And you've got Howe saying, I'm hearing some whinnying in your barn. What do you mean you don't have a horse? And the wise guy that the guy was said, we have a mare. You asked if we had a horse. We have a mare. So he says, can I borrow your mare? And the teenager goes, it's Thursday. Mom and Dad usually take the mare to go visit a relative on Fridays. I'm going to say no. Okay. He goes away. So on Saturday morning, Mom and Dad have taken the mare on this trip. And Saturday morning, they wake up and the animal is in their yard, not in the pasture, not in the barn. And apparently had very sore gums. It was described as if ridden with a hot bridle. Okay. And they really were trying to figure out what was going on. And it was Saturday morning, and the deacon had to do something elsewhere. And Mary asked her brother to come over and take a look at the animal. Apparently he was pretty good with animals. So he came over and he's looking, and Isaac Sr. said, I got stuff to do. I'll leave this with you. And Isaac came back later that night, and his brother-in-law was still there and said, well, I've tried everything. I looked to see if maybe it was from bot flies. Do you know what a bot is? It basically is as a little worm will burrow into the gums and flesh of animals, especially horses and maybe sheep. And it's really gross. And so he said, I looked to see if the inflamed gums had any evidence of bot flies, and he didn't. And then he tells Isaac that there's only one thing I can think of. You might not like it. And Isaac said, what? He said, okay, go get a pipe with some tobacco. At this point, Isaac is going, I don't know. Now, I have to tell you that this story comes from 4 accounts. Everything in here is from these sources. One from Isaac Sr., one from Isaac Jr., one from Mary, and one from her brother. He asks him to go and get some tobacco and a pipe. And at this point, the deacon is going, I don't like where this is going. And his brother-in-law said, oh, no, this is legal for man or beast. And Isaac is going, I don't know. So they bring out the pipe, light the pipe, and then in the records it says, and they put it under the fundament of the horse. And I'm going, what the heck's a fundament? It's the area underneath the tail, for lack of a better word. And they put this lit pipe underneath the tail in front of the fundament of the horse, and blue flames shot out of the back of this poor animal and singed the fur. It was just like, okay. And apparently they did it 2 or 3 times. You can't quite tell from the descriptions, but they did it at least twice. And then Isaac said, you know what? It was catching the hay on fire. I mean, they were doing it inside. And it was catching the hay on fire. Finally, Isaac said, cut it out. No more. I need the barn more than I need this animal. That's enough. Okay. Next morning is Sunday morning. And people are all on their way to the meeting house. And one of the neighbors is passing by and hears this story about this poor animal that was still sick. And he goes in to look at the mare, and they're talking about it. And the neighbor said, maybe it's bewitched. Therein always lies the tale. Said, but we can figure it out if we cut off a piece of the ear and burn it. Now, this was sympathetic magic, that if a witch had somehow bewitched somebody, there would be this invisible effluvia. If you listen to Thomas Brattle's account of it, this invisible effluvia would emanate from their eyes and go into the person or the animal. And if you could somehow get some of that effluvia and you could hurt it, you could hurt the witch. So when we think about the witch cake in Salem Village, it had the girl's urine. Clearly, some of this effluvia could have been in the urine. You also sometimes hear about witch bottles that have hair. It's easier on people to take urine and hair or fingernails. But with animals, they would say, oh, let's cut off the ear. And the idea is if you could hurt it, in this case for the witch cake, the dog biting it, or in this case with an ear, you could set fire to it, it would hurt the witch, and the witch was supposed to come and try and stop this because they were in pain. That's how it was supposed to work. So this neighbor is talking to Deacon Cummings about doing this with the ear of the mare. And the deacon, being a deacon, is saying, it's Sunday. And I don't know about this. This is a little iffy. But if you want to come back tomorrow, you can try it. Right then, the poor animal has been very sick and falls over almost on top of them. If they hadn't gotten out the door, this animal would have crushed them. Big horse, should be mare. And the animal was dead. Okay, so I'm going, okay, this is interesting. I'm still laughing about the fundament stuff. But then I started wondering, why was this tale so important that four people would tell the story? And why was this being used as evidence against Elizabeth Howe? Her husband is the only one who appears in it. Why was this being used against her? And I kept reading him, and suddenly I found something in Mary's account. Apparently when they got to church that day, when they got to the meeting house, word had gotten around. And Elizabeth Howe had said something, a really smart remark. He said, well, of course this happened when you feed an animal brimstone and other combustible things. And I'm thinking, why would she even say that? Why? It turns out that to make laxatives, they were using things like that, oil and brimstone, sulfur, things like that, to try and get the stuff going through the animal. It turns out horses can't vomit. That's what colic is. Everything has to go in one direction. So they would try and give the animal a laxative. And it comes out the other end. It's flammable. So she was making this smart remark that, of course, this happened. What happens when you feed your animal combustibles? And I think that smart remark and Mary Cummings' existing animosity against Elizabeth Howe combined. So that story of the men in her family being idiots turned into this woman is responsible for what happened. But that particular one about Elizabeth Howe, that sticks with me. The Three Stooges meet Joan of Arc. So that's the story that just always gets me.